you don't care, no. You just don't care, no. I don't wanna play, baby, I'm just fine. I don't need you anymore.
For content information and the link to the written version of this entry, please check the description below. Spoilers. This entry contains spoilers for episode 3 of Marvel Studios' What If series, so if you haven't seen it yet, I recommend you do that before checking out this entry. There will also be minor spoilers for the films Iron Man 2, The Incredible Hulk, Thor, Captain America, The First Avenger, Captain Marvel, and Ant-Man. I do not own the rights to any of the characters or events mentioned. They are property of Marvel Studios and the Walt Disney Company. Welcome to the third entry in the series where we discuss each episode of Season 1 of Marvel's first ever MCU canon animated series. This series focuses on what would happen if one thing within the MCU changed. These episodes are presented in 30-minute runtimes and are stuffed to the brim of juicy content to explore. In the third episode of What If, we follow what would happen if Earth lost its mightiest heroes. This review is a week behind when the episode first aired. This is because I had to get the first two episodes caught up with before I released this one. It would have been out sooner, but I watched the fourth episode and I needed to take a day to recover. That said, I hope you enjoy this review. Disclaimer. I am not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company or Marvel Studios. All assets of these companies, which I mention here, are strictly for reviewing purposes. I do not claim to own any of the content, and I do encourage you all to check out the original media the content we are exploring was based on. If you would like to support me personally, please consider checking the links in the description below. They include my Cash App, my GoFundMe, and the link to my email address where you can send me inquiries for anything. I will also link my Twitter at UTU with JJ. Now let's get back to the video. What birthed this new reality? Before we get into the main plot and what I thought of it, we need to start by seeing what changed. This new reality was born after Hope Van Dyne's decided to become an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. This decision eventually led to her death at the hands of the Winter Soldier, not mentioned explicitly but heavily implied. This, unlike the previous two episodes, is not revealed right away in order to lead to the reveal at the end that Hope's father, Hank Pym, was in fact the one taking out the heroes in order to get back at Nick Fury, who he blames for the death of Hope. His actions lead to the question the episode poses: what if the world lost its mightiest heroes? The plot. The episode begins with Nick Fury and Natasha Romanoff on their way to meet Tony Stark. The events play out almost identically to Iron Man 2 until Nat goes to inject Tony with lithium dioxide in order to heal or at least temporarily ease his palladium poisoning, and he ends up dropping down dead instead of the desired effect. Natasha is arrested but escapes rather quickly as Nick Fury goes off to check out a mysterious hammer that has found its way to New Mexico. The hammer is naturally followed by the God of Thunder, Thor Odinson, which Fury isn't aware of at the time, and his amazing hair, which is helpfully pointed out by Agent Coulson. Fury orders Clint Barton to aim his arrow at Thor just in case anything goes wrong, but it does anyway because just as Thor is about to pick up Mjolnir, Barton shoots him in the heart. Knowing Barton never misses on purpose, he too is arrested for murder, and is later found dead in his cell by Fury, who makes it clear Barton would not have killed himself since he has a secret family. Meanwhile, Natasha visits Betty Ross in order to test out what exactly has killed Stark in hopes it will prove her innocence. Betty reveals that the lithium dioxide had not been tampered with, and that instead something had shot itself out of the syringe, which is not her area of expertise. She tries to get Nat to leave because she's hiding Bruce Banner. Nat gets a call from Fury explaining that Barton was dead and that he figured out the targets of the serial killer are those on his Avengers Initiative list, which includes Natasha and Bruce Banner. Natasha finds Bruce Banner and the pair attempt to escape to safety before being intercepted by Thaddeus Ross, who shoots at them, making Banner angry, turning him into the Hulk before he spontaneously explodes after growing too big. As this is happening, Loki shows up in New Mexico with an army to avenge Thor's death and bring his murderer to justice. Loki threatens Fury, but they form a temporary truce so that Fury has time to find the actual individual responsible. Natasha discovers a deceased agent's profile has recently been used and is quickly taken out by the killer, but not before giving Fury the warning that it was all about hope. Fury begins piecing together who the killer is and forms a plan with Loki to take him down. Loki, disguised as Fury, lures the killer out of hiding by showing up in the graveyard Hope Van Dyne is buried in. Hank Pym, in a yellow jacket suit, shows up revealing he was the killer, picking off each of Fury's choices for the Avengers Initiative, as revenge for being responsible for Hope's death. He killed Stark by projecting himself through the syringe, Thor by knocking Barton's arrow out of his hand. Loki, still disguised as Fury, questions him what Thor had to do with the Avengers, and Pym laughs it off, saying Fury would have snapped him up in a heartbeat. He killed Barton, sneaking into his ear, Hulk by throwing an enlargement disc at his heart, and Romanoff by ambushing her. Loki and Pym get into a fight where Loki duplicates himself as Fury to confuse the killer before revealing himself to be Loki and arresting Pym. Fury thanks Loki for his help, but Loki decides to stay and take over Midgard, Earth, causing Fury to go off and start a new team by getting Steve Rogers out of the ice and summoning Carol Danvers with his pager. The setting. Being based on several films, as you can imagine, there are several locations in this episode, including the diner from Iron Man 2, New Mexico where Mjolnir is found, Culver University where the battle between Hulk and General Ross takes place, and the San Francisco graveyard where Hope Van Dyne is buried. The locations in this film are nothing too exciting. What worked with the last two episodes is that although we knew some of these places, they felt different and fresh, as if we were seeing them for the first time. The settings in this episode felt almost pedestrian. We had seen every one of them before, there was no excitement there. The only truly interesting setting in this episode was the graveyard, and even that was an almost lackluster place to set the final battle. The most interesting scene to me was when Loki appeared with his army of hundreds of Asgardians, including Lady Sif, but overall the settings just didn't captivate me the same way as the last two episodes. This wasn't helped from what appeared to be a poorer quality of animation in this episode. It was still high-end, but notably less so than the episode preceding it. Consider checking out my Patreon in the link in the description below. For just £1 or your currency's equivalent of £1 each month, you'll be able to see all of my videos a day before they air. That's my Patreon in the description below. Thank you for considering. The characters. This episode didn't seem to know what to do with its characters. It killed the main players like Tony Stark and Thor off so quickly that it didn't even appear shocking. It just felt like a way to speed the episode along. There was one death that truly horrified me, and we will get to that in a bit. But first, let's go over some of the characters in this episode. Nick Fury. Fury was without doubt the main character of this episode, which takes place on what Marvel fans like to call Fury's Big Week. This is the week the events of Iron Man 2, The Incredible Hulk, and Thor all take place. Fury proved in this episode that he can be the main character, but it's a shame he had to show it in an episode that just seemed poorly written and rushed. I did enjoy Fury's character. I do think he played the hand he's been dealt with very well, and Samuel L. Jackson, as always, gives the character everything he's got. I'd love to see Fury take the main character role more often, but hopefully in episodes that match his presence. Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow. When many fans watched this episode, they claimed to have been taken aback by how different Natasha sounds in this episode. But honestly, different voice actors doesn't bother me. It does bother me that some actors weren't asked to come back and were replaced though. It's an alternate universe after all. Things are going to be a little different. Natasha was the worst animated in this episode. Her lips didn't quite sync up with what she was saying. But despite that, it was also nice to see her get a lead role. I really enjoyed her in Winter Soldier, and I think this kind of dynamic with her character works. Her death in the episode lacked any kind of emotion though. If a main character is going to die, we should feel something about it, but it just felt rushed. Her character deserves better treatment than what the episode gave her. Agent Phil Coulson. Coulson was a breath of fresh air during this musty episode. His comedy added something the episode noticeably lacked. I loved his description of Thor, but felt it did go a bit far when he was sniffing his corpse. That was just uncomfortable, to say the least. But I'm glad he showed up, and when utilised right, he was utilised right. He felt right at home in this episode, and might just be one of the only enjoyable elements of it. Betty Ross and Bruce Banner. It was a surprise to see Betty in the MCU again, but a somewhat welcome one. Personally, I remember little to nothing about the Incredible Hulk film, so it was nice to see elements from it being revived. I didn't love Betty's character in this episode. She came across as a little nettled, and I wasn't the most and it wasn't the most pleasant to watch, but it was somewhat understandable when we discover she was hiding Bruce Banner. Bruce's death was by far the most horrific part of this episode. It's good they managed to finally make us feel the death of a character, but when you go from a 2-second death by arrow to a drawn-out explosive death like this, it really does make you feel uncomfortable. They drew every single emotion Hulk was experienced during that death, and it was horrible to watch. I don't like how they just left Betty behind to deal with it either. It just wasn't a pleasant viewing experience. Loki. When going into this episode, I was under the impression Loki would be the main antagonist, which turned out not to be the case, at least not at first. It was fun, however, to see his character again, and alongside Lady Sif of all characters, the MCU has certainly been missing her presence. Thor's death was nothing to rave about in this episode, so it felt strange to see a character who at this point in the timeline wasn't the biggest fan of his brother swoop down to avenge him. Of course, he had ulterior motives, and it was fun seeing him take over the world, but to me, even his presence couldn't save the episode, and when Tom Hiddleston can't save an episode, you know it's been poorly written. Hank Pym. Credit where credit is due, Hank Pym was generally frightening in this episode. As a serial killer, he played the role scarily well. It would be nice to see more of his dark side of Hank in the live-action films, because what they gave us here was incredible. I never would have guessed he would be the killer in this episode, but mostly because the episode didn't do a great job of setting up the reveal about Hope's death, other than showing a couple of background images of Janet Van Dyne. But Yellow Jacket Pym did somewhat make up for that. He's proven he's a force not to be reckoned with, and one of the few highlights of the episode alongside Coulson's comedic timings. Overall thoughts. Overall, I didn't enjoy this episode as much as the last two. It felt rushed, the animation wasn't great, and the story was difficult to digest. Part of the reason for this, I feel, was that they didn't have a strong attention-grabbing question that pulled you in. What if Captain Carter became the first Avenger was a question I know I've asked before, and it didn't disappoint. The last episode about T'Challa becoming a Star-Lord was exciting because I'd never asked that question, but it made me want to see the answer. Those episodes focused on one or maybe two franchises each, but this one tries to throw in far too many, and the result is confusion and a foul taste of disappointment. This episode just didn't feel asked for. Sure, on paper the premise is interesting, but I've read Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, and it was done far better than this, because each death was impactful. If you're going to kill off the world's mightiest heroes, you need to shock us, and make each death impactful. If all the deaths were like Hulk's, I would have enjoyed this episode more, but they weren't, and it became too obvious that their deaths were only used as devices to push the plot along, rather than meaningful in any way. Despite all this, the story continues whether we ask for it or not to, so I ask you to join me as we ponder the question, what's next? With all his recruits gone, and Loki now ruler of Midgard, Fury is left with no choice but to turn to his last resorts, unfreezing Captain America and paging Captain Marvel. When discussing with her friend how this episode would lead into Guardians of the Universe, we had no idea. One of the more likely options is Captain Marvel, but the main focus of the episode was not on her, so in a way it feels like cheating and just shoehorning in a way for her to be in the team. Fury himself is the most likely candidate for the team. He proved he himself was an Avenger in this episode, and being the main character, it only makes sense to include him. But I was disappointed by the end of this episode. It just didn't feel as impactful to me as it was intended. Sure, hope is great, but as the next episode will reveal, there is a beauty to be found in bleakness. So this was the third entry in my What If review series. I know this is a week late, but as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to get this out of the way before talking about the behemoth that was episode 4, and get caught up with the 2 entries that preceded this one. My next entry in this series will be out very soon, so I hope you check it out. Thank you for watching this review and checking out my channel. Remember to subscribe, like, share, and comment your thoughts on this video. It really helps me out. My next goal for 20th of September, when I go back to uni, is 450 subscribers. I hope that we can reach it. I know that we can reach it, so I look forward to it. Again, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!